Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to be covering the greatest generals of all time tier list. And the way we're going to rank it is the literal god of war. Legend, you're not going to win against them. The great general, and then the good general. There are no bad generals on this list. Everyone is a legendary general in their own right and has a great deal of success and a ton of victories. So, starting off, we have Mr. Cao Cao, or otherwise pronounced Chow Chow. He was a Chinese statesman and military mastermind. He is often dubbed the Napoleon of China. He was alive during the Three Kingdoms period, and he led pretty much the most successful kingdom of the three. He didn't unify China, unfortunately. He lost the Battle of Red Cliffs, which cost him the unification of China, and that was the only time he arguably made a mistake. Everything else he pretty much won, and he won some insane battles. The one of the most notable victories he had was the Battle of Guandu. So Guandu, he had something like 40,000 men against something along the lines of 200,000 men. And when you read the battle, it is insane. He just spends the entire time avoiding a direct conflict, attacking food supplies, enforcing their a besieged fragment of his army, and eventually he's able to destroy the army that's literally 200,000 strong with an army that is a fifth of its size, which is extremely impressive. Sorry, not a not yeah, something like a fifth of its size. So fifth of its size. Sorry, just made sure the math was correct on that. But yeah, pretty impressive guy. He will win other major battles. He will create one of the strongest kingdoms, the strongest kingdom of the Three Kingdoms period. He will almost win everything except he loses the Battle of Red Cliffs because he runs into the problem of fire ships. So effectively, he had a fleet getting ready to invade the southern portion of China, but then the two leaders of those kingdoms teamed up together and they burned his ships. It was a trick. He fell for it, and then he didn't have the resources to reinvade. And it fell into a stalemate as neither side could break through. And eventually, all three of them would pass away, and none of their successors would unify China. It would be a different person to do it. But that being said, absolute legend, the rightfully named Napoleon of China. He won something like in terms of major battles, I believe he won more than 10 major battles, with some being extremely huge, like Guandu. He will win a bunch of minor skirmishes. That being said, he is a bit older, so not all of the information about him is complete, and a lot of it is fictionalized as it comes from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which isn't 100% accurate. It likes to paint Cao Cao as being like the ultimate villain, but it does provide a good amount of detail about his military endeavors. Next up, this is Frederick the Great. I'm going to put him into the you're not going to win category, and I'll explain why. So, Frederick the Great will win something along the lines of 16 to 18 major battles, and he is pretty talented, but he lacks a lot of skill in terms of having confidence. During one of those first few battles, he runs away and his other generals have to win it for him. Oftentimes, he's fighting against the same person. He doesn't fight against a great deal variety of enemies, and he's ultimately saved by there being a change in the King of Russia, who made the war effort turn against the interest of the old Russian nobility and turned in favor of Prussia. So it was like called something along the lines of it was a miracle, and the miracle of the Russians, of the Russian house. I forget what the exact name is, but it was considered to be this huge miracle for Frederick. And it was at a time when Prussia was pretty much losing, and had that switch not happened, Prussia would have almost certainly lost. That being said, he was able to hold out for that long against most of Europe. He is able to defeat the Austrians, the Russians. He also does a bunch of campaigns against them, and he wins pretty consistently. That being said, half of his victories are against one person, so we can't rank him super high. And he does run away in quite a few battles, and he does lose quite a few battles. But that being said, he has some amazing victories, but he also has some pretty big disasters. I would say you're not going to win. I don't think he's quite legend category purely because I think He would have to have more victories under his belt, but he is one of the better great generals. So next up, we have Genghis Khan. So this is an interesting one because Genghis Khan doesn't actually um, lead a lot of the campaigns himself. He'll send his general, who's on here, Subutai. I'm just gonna throw Subutai up here, and I'll explain both the rankings together. So Genghis Khan was someone who at points was a general, and he was somewhat of a good general. He actually loses quite a few battles early on, which is somewhat of a mark against him. But what he's really good at is planning a lot of the campaigns. So he's actually an amazing planner. And when he sends someone who is more of a talented general like Subutai to go and do it, it will be much better result than him doing it himself. He loses of quite a few battles early on to other Mongols, but after he unifies the Mongols, he very rarely ever loses. And the battles that the Mongols will lose, it will be under the command of other leaders. It won't be under his command or the command of Subutai. But that being said, most of his victories can be attributed to other generals like Subutai and Jebe, but Jebe will die somewhat early compared to Subutai, who actually won't. So most of the credit for most of the Mongol invasions early on, for arguably being the most successful empire ever, can be attributed to um, Genghis Khan's planning and Subutai's execution. So Subutai is up here. He is arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest general of all time. He defeated something like every single kingdom he came into. He only loses 1 to 2 battles. He loses an ambush to a group of people that fought like the Mongols. It was some Central Asian tribe when he was passing somewhere around the Russian, kind of in the middle of Russia, where you would encounter like Turkic peoples. I believe he loses to one of them, and he may have lost one more battle, but it slips my mind. But that being said, he wins something along the lines of 60 battles. He wins famously the battle at Kalka River, which completely annihilates a huge Rus army that comes from Kievan Rus. So that's when the Rus first find out about the Mongols, who will later on go to invade them. He will also win a good amount of battles against the Chinese and against the Persians as well when they invade the Khwarezmian Empire, sorry, Khwarezm, let me pronounce it correctly, against Shah Muhammad II. And he will win quite a few battles against them and help lead the destruction of it, and he'll lead a great raid. Yeah, there are so many stories about this guy, and his tactics are kind of impressive, a little repetitive, but they almost always work. And his tactics are brilliant. So effectively, what the Mongols would do is fight, and then act like they're losing, so they would run away. But then when they're running away, they would all of a sudden turn back once they figured out their enemies were tired of chasing them and just annihilate them. So if you're chasing a Mongol army and you thought they were losing, you might end up chasing them for a few days thinking, "Oh, we're going to win." And you might catch the Mongols, you might get some of them. You might attack a few of them thinking you're winning, but then all of a sudden once your army's a little divided, the Mongols would spring up out of nowhere and completely ambush them and destroy the armies, and this worked a lot of the time. He also led a lot of sieges. Overall impressive. He's arguably the general here who actually fought against the most enemies out of everyone here. So yeah, I mean, this guy is a literal god of war. There's no way around it. I don't think there's anyone else on this list who fought against the sheer variety that this guy did. Okay, next up, this is Ramses III, and he's going to go into the legend category. He led something along the lines of, I believe, around 17 campaigns, mainly to Canaan around the Levant. He also campaigns against Nubia and to the Libyans as well, I believe. And he doesn't lose a single battle under his reign, which was long and prosperous. Egypt experiences a huge revival. They're able to again fend off the sea people who were destroying a lot of things around the Bronze Age at this time. So that's another victory for him. That being said, he is a lot older. I mean, this is a guy who was alive something along the lines of 3,000 plus years ago. So how much information we have about him is a bit dubious. A lot of inscriptions about him are going to be propagandized. But that being said, from the archaeological record, it does seem to corroborate a lot of what is being said about him. it does seem like the guy is an absolute military genius. So I'm just gonna put him into the legendary category. Again, not a lot of variety of enemies. Not the most difficult thing to do either. At that time, like military expertise was not super developed. Like there was no idea of how to wage a war outside of you would just send in men with some chariots. So there is no idea of like good proper tactics. So it's a bit easier as well. But that being said, the guy never lost. He led a lot of campaigns, and it was at a time when Egypt was gradually being weaker. So to his credit, I'm gonna put him in the legendary category. Next up, this is Baibars. Baibars is gonna go at the top of a legend. He is almost God of War, and I will explain why. So Baibars was a Mamluk, the Mamluk leader of Mamluk Egypt. He was one of the sultans, and he is famous for defeating the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut, which was one of the first few major defeats the Mongols will have, and it was the first major defeat the Mongols had when they were invading Western Asia. So he will beat them outside the town of Ain Jalut, which was in Syria, and at Ain Jalut he will actually not only defeat the Mongols but kill the Mongol commander Kit Buka. And they had somewhat equal troops though. So the main reason I think he was able to actually win this battle was because the Mongols at the time were using a lot of auxiliary troops. So they had a lot of Armenian and Georgian and other peoples who were allied with the Mongols helping them out, and they didn't have as many Mongol soldiers. Whereas Baibar's army was made up of Turkic Mamluk soldiers, so the Baibar's army was more Mongolian in a way than the actual Mongol army, which is one of the main contributors as to why Baibars won this battle. But that being said, he was also extremely talented. He was the first person to actually decisively defeat the Mongols. He also will go on to campaign against the Mongols again successfully. He will be able to fend them off. He will also do campaigns against the Crusaders and also against the Armenians in Sicilian Armenia, and he will actually defeat them there and conquer parts of the kingdom, I believe. He will also defeat the Crusaders. And he does not lose a battle, so he's going to go at the top of legendary tier list, purely mainly for that victory against the Mongols. Ain Jalut was arguably the single greatest victory that the Muslim world ever had against the Mongols, and it proved that the Mongols were not invincible. So yeah, but do keep in mind, it was not against Hulegu, who was the Khan of the Ilkhanate, which was the Western Asian part of the fourth of the Mongol Empire, who had most of his major armies. It was against the field commander, who was still fairly talented, but it was not against the main guy. It was not against the larger army, but it did prevent Egypt's destruction and the invasion of North Africa. So he's got to go into the legendary category for that one. And he doesn't lose, and he has some other great campaigns. Oh yeah, this is the one where oh yeah, yeah. I think there's no explanation for this one. If you are familiar with this gentleman right here, this is Nader Shah. Nader Shah was the Shah of Iran during one of the worst times ever to be Shah of Iran. He was born to a poor Turkmen tribe, and for most of his life, he was somewhat of a gang leader, and then eventually the Persian government was collapsing at the time. I forget what the empire was called, but he would pretty much revitalize it, and he will become Shah of Iran by taking his armies and conquering the invaders. He will fend off an invasion from the Afghans. He will reestablish himself against the Ottomans and against the Afghans and other invaders. He will also invade India quite successfully and sack Delhi infamously. This is something that gets him a lot of negativity because he ends up exterminating a lot of people. This guy's superhero was Timur, who was someone who killed something along the lines of 17 million people. So yeah, not a good guy. Not a good guy. He'll eventually get assassinated as well by his own nobility because they don't like what he was doing. But that being said, the guy was insane. One time he defeated an Ottoman army with something like 15,000 men against 40,000 men, which doesn't sound the most insane and impressive, except you do have to keep in mind this is around the time when they have cannons and muskets and they have firearms. So he was actually able to defeat somewhat of a modern army with a much smaller one, which is infinitely harder because the units are much more equal. Musketeers are much more equal to each other than, say, swordsmen. One swordman can be significantly more talented than another one, but two musketeers, you can only be so different, especially with experience. So, yeah, the fact that he was able to defeat the Ottomans quite a few times, reestablish Iran, invade India successfully, fend off the Afghans, reestablish Iran, and prevent it from collapsing. Yeah, he's just got to go the literal god of war. That being said, he does have some defeats, but none of his defeats are particularly substantial. He is able to quite quickly recover from them, so therefore he's going to go into the literal god of war category. Next up, Ashurbanipal. I'm going to put this guy into the you're not going to win category, and I'll explain. So, Ashurbanipal was the king of Assyria, and he is the guy who was actually able to quite successfully invade Egypt during the Neo Assyrian Empire. And he was arguably the greatest military commander of his era. He was someone who was able to lead campaigns against Egypt, successfully invaded parts of the Levant. He put down a bunch of civil wars, and he also committed a whole scale genocide in Elam and conquered much of Elam. Yeah, not a good dude again. Most of these guys arguably are not good dudes. Ashurbanipal arguably is bottom five or three for the worst people here. So yeah, he would do a lot of horrific stuff. No human rights again, but military mastermind nonetheless. Only reason he doesn't go higher is I don't know if he's undefeated or not. It's hard to say because most of the record comes from Assyrian sources, so you don't have any conflicting sources. So you don't have a source that says he lost or he won. It's all just from him. So and he's a lot older at the time. It wouldn't have been as hard for him to win because again, there's no military technique developed, so it's a bit easier if you have some idea of a military technique. But that being said, I think he's going to go into the you're not going to win category. Next up, this is a very unknown figure. This guy's name is Huozotl, and he's going to go right up into the legend category. I'm going to put him right here. He was a medieval Aztec leader who was arguably said to be the greatest military mind and conqueror in all of Mesoamerica, in all of pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, and he is the father of the famous Moctezuma, who will later lead to the collapse of the Aztec Empire and the arrival of Spanish conquistadors. So why this guy is so famous is because he actually led a bunch of successful campaigns and made the Aztecs the most powerful force in their region for the at their height. For the first time, they were the most powerful, and they peaked power under his reign. He led a campaign against rebels and he defeated them. He also subjugated the Mishatecs, Zapotecs, and other native peoples. So not only did he put down a rebellion, but he also was able to successfully invade their neighbors. And he is by far the most successful of pre-Columbian military leaders in Mesoamerica. So it's going to go right up into the legend category. Next up, Khalid ibn Walid. Yeah, this guy's going to go into a little God of War. Excuse me. Let me tell you about this guy. This guy is an absolute God of War. He was someone who was born in Arabia during the start of Islam, so during the life of Muhammad, and he's someone who's originally against Muhammad, and there will be battles against the Muslims and non-believers, and he will actually lose because he was part of the non-believers. But then one time he decides that it's enough, I'm going to go and convert to Islam, and he does, and he will then proceed to never lose a battle again, and he will lead a bunch of crushing victories against the Romans and the Sassanids. And his most famous victory is, of course, the Battle of Yarmouk, which is one of the most insane ones. It's against a Roman army, which was easily more than twice the size of the Arabian army, and it lasted for 4 days. And the way he won this was by waiting until the Romans were tired, and then he sent his cavalry around the Roman army to strike it from the rear. And when this happened, the Romans panicked, and when they tried to escape, he also hid cavalry that made their retreat basically impossible, and he was able to surround and pretty much destroy a major Roman field army, which led to the collapse of the Romans in the Levant, and allowed them to cut off Rome from Egypt, and they lost the Levant and Syria, and he was responsible for that. He will also win a ton of battles against the Persians. Yeah, so what a guy. He'll also win against a united Persian Roman army. He never loses against a major army, and he doesn't lose once he converts. He's also a great duelist. So he's someone who will absolutely not only do great as a general, but also in single combat. Yeah, the guy is a literal god of war. One of the most talented men ever. I gotta put him up here. Timur. Yeah, this is another god of war. He wages war against the Mongols. He will wage a war against other sort of tribesmen. He will also wage a war against the Ottomans quite successfully, almost annihilating their existence. And he will also invade Delhi and destroy the city of Delhi quite brutally, just like Nader Shah would do much later. And he will destroy a lot of Iran as well. He is someone who will kill something along the lines of 10 to 17 million people. And he calls himself the Sword of Islam. And the reason that he calls himself the Sword of Islam is because he's a devout Muslim, but most of the people he killed were actually Muslims. So he was born, and then he tried to steal sheep when in his youth because he was somewhat of a scoundrel and he was born to poor, kind of lower class. And he would get shot in the leg with an arrow, giving him a limp. And he will have this limp give him the name Tamur Lame, meaning someone who is lame or someone who has a bad leg, a lame leg. And he will win a lot of battles. One of the most famous is the Battle of the Terek River, which is an insane battle because he actually almost loses it against the Mongols, but then he turns around and he's able to successfully defeat them and conquer much of the Ilkhanate. And he is responsible for the collapse of the Ilkhanate, which is insanely impressive. He will also cause his favorite city of his capital city. My name is slipping me, Samarkand, to be one of the most well decorated cities in all of Iran, as he will deport people who are talented artisans to go and work on his city and to make it the most beautiful place on earth. And there'll be a ton of beautiful mosques even now in Samarkand in Uzbekistan, which is around the area that he was born. He's considered to be an Uzbek, and he will help to build up that city and be a great patron of the arts. He will also destroy much of Anatolia. He will destroy much of the Ilkhanate. He will also invade other parts of the world. He also tried to invade China, but he dies before he makes it. He was trying to invade the Ming Dynasty, but he dies in his 70s, right before he is touching the borders. So yeah, terrifying guy, never loses. He comes from basically nothing. There is no one that can really stand in his way, and he defeats absolutely 100% of everyone. Oh, and he also captures the Ottoman Sultan. I forget exactly what battle, but there was a very famous battle. He will fight against Bayezid, and he will capture Bayezid, the lightning bolt. And this was one of the biggest defeats the Ottomans would ever suffer, and they almost collapsed. He will also, I believe, lead a siege against some of the Christian knights and win against them as well. So yeah, undefeated, brilliant guy. Next up, Julius Caesar. I'm going to put him here. This one's going to be a bit controversial, but I'll explain. He's not undefeated. He's not undefeated, and a lot of the people that he is fighting are not the most talented. Most of the time, he's fighting against tribesmen, Gallic tribesmen, and Germanic tribesmen. Most of his battles are not against people who are talented. That being said, he does defeat Pompey, who is extremely talented. Now, Pompey was extremely talented, but he was also winning against Caesar, but then they forced him to make the wrong decision, and he gets destroyed at Pharsalus. But before that, he does actually defeat Caesar at Dyrrhachium. And Caesar will also suffer some defeats against Gallic tribes and against Germanic tribes. So that is something that is against Caesar. But that being said, he does conquer Gaul. He does conquer parts of Germania. He does cross the Rhine. He does invade Britain, which isn't the most successful campaign, but he also is able to defeat the Britons. He will put down the uprising of Vercingetorix, of course, famously, win the civil war, and get assassinated before he could march against the Parthians. So Caesar is easily going to go into the you're not going to win category. I would put him higher, but his enemies are not too impressive, and he does lose. So next up, this is a fairly unknown figure. This is Hu Qibing, this guy right here. I'm going to put him into good general. So Hu Qibing is famous because he was a Han general who died extremely young at the age of 23, who won one of the biggest battles against the Xiongnu. So during the Xiongnu and Han War, Ho Chi Binh was a field commander, and he defeated the Xiongnu at the Battle of Mobai. And reportedly, he took some 20,000 men and defeated an army of 300,000 men, which sounds fictionalized, and more than likely it was. It's hard to argue that there were that many men there. More than likely, it was a lot closer to maybe 70 to 80,000 men. But that being said, he is quite famous for this deed and helping the Han turn the tide against the Xiongnu and end a lot of the abuses by the Xiongnu onto the Chinese. So he gets put into good get general territory, but he also dies very young. He dies at something like 23. He does not get a chance to prove himself because he dies so young, but still talented guy. I wanted to include him here because he is someone who gets forgotten, but does show a lot of promise, just does not fulfill out his potential. Next up, Belisarius, great general. So this is going to be controversial again. A lot of people regard Belisarius as being a military genius, and he's somewhat, but he is not quite that. And I'll explain. So Belisarius will help lead the Eastern Roman Empire, and they will win against the Gothic kingdom, and they will also the Ostrogothic kingdom, I should say, and they will also win against the Persians. They will also win against the Lombards, and they will also win against the Vandals in North Africa. So for these, he gets put into great general, but the reason he doesn't get put higher is because he does suffer quite a few defeats to these reasonably weaker enemies. Namely, he loses against the Persians. He also loses, I believe, against the Germans at one point, and he loses against the Persians. But he does reconquer most of North Africa. He also wins a lot in one of the most important wars where the Eastern Roman Empire is restoring itself with the western half. So Justinian's restoration, much of it can be attributed to him, which is why he is so famous. But that being said, his enemies are also not super talented. Like, he'll oftentimes scare them off by just pretending like his army is a lot bigger than it is, by doing tricks like having all his men use hunting equipment to make it seem like, oh look, this army's so big because we have like 30,000 men trying to hunt for food. How big is the army that they're trying to feed? Or it'll be like he'll light a bunch of campfires, and they will panic because they think, if there's one campfire for like 5 men, and now you've lit like 300 campfires, how many men do you have? Like, if they think their army is considerably smaller than his. But yeah, he's going to be put into the great general category. He came in at an important time. He is reliable, but he does not win against the most talented of enemies, and he does have quite a few defeats. So he's going to go into the good general category. Arwellian, he is almost literal God of War. I want to put him up here, but I'm going to put him at top of legend, and I'll explain. So he does have defeats on his record. He does have defeats. He does lose against a Germanic invasion at one point, I believe. He is able to successfully defeat them afterwards, but he does lose against a Germanic invasion, which is something that I do think we can count against him. But that being said, for 5 years, this man did not lose. For 5 years, this man actually, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna put him up. Boop, 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 boop. Nope, Subutai is a little. No, you know what? For 5 years, let me explain to you what this man did. He took Rome when it was divided into three kingdoms. It was the Gallic Empire, it was the Pomeranian Empire, and then there was Rome, right in the middle. And he managed to defeat everyone. He defeated a Germanic invasion, he defeated the Pomeranian Empire, he reconquered all of the eastern half, and on top of that, he also defeated the Gallic Empire. And he pretty much for 5 years went undefeated at the time when Rome was almost on the brink of collapse, and he pretty much single-handedly reversed a century of bad luck. What an absolute legend. He is the reason the crisis of the third century comes to an end, is mainly due to the work of Arwellian. He is a literal god of war. He is undefeated. He reigns for such a short time. He gets assassinated so soon into his reign. But for those 5 glorious years, this man does not lose. He improves the fundamental defensive structure of Roman cities by building more walls. He will build the Arwellian walls, which are quite famous. An absolute legend in his own right, the literal god of war. I think he deserves to be up here. Alexander the Great. Yeah, is there anything that can be said about this guy? I would put him above Knight. I would actually put him below Knighter, maybe. Hard to say. I would put him here, actually. Yeah, I think that's fair. Never loses a battle, wins against armies that are, upwards, or I think 3 to 4 times to maybe 5 times as big as his, wins against the most powerful empire on earth, wins against Balkan tribes, wins against Greeks, wins against Afghans, wins against some cities in the Levant, wins every single siege, wins every single battle, never loses anything, except maybe one skirmish can be classified as a defeat by him, but then he will actually turn around and still defeat the army that ambushed him at one point, which forced him to retreat, but he didn't really lose any men, and he's able to defeat that ambush later on. He'll also lead a campaign against the Indians, and he will also win against Indians. I believe it's called the Mali campaign, and he'll also conquer parts of Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, parts of Central Asia. He'll defeat Scythian Central Asian tribes too. He'll also conquer all of Iran, all of Egypt, all of the Levantine coast, Anatolia, Greece. What more can be said about this guy? Absolute generational talent, the literal god of war, almost never loses, absolute legendary status. He is what you think of when you think of amazing general. That being said, he does die at 32. But absolutely impressive. His victories against the Persians are insane. He wins two major ones, one at Ipsus and then one at Gargamella, which is one of the most impressive ones. That's the one where his army was something along the lines of somewhere in a range of like 40,000 or so, and he is facing off against an army that is over 100,000. And he pretty easily defeats them. So yeah, pretty impressive guy. He'll also win a very impressive victory against some of the Greeks as well, like the Siege of Thebes and the battle with his father. I forget what it's called, but against Coronea, it was against one of the anti-Macedonian Greek coalitions. He'll pretty much work on his father's legacy and turn his father turned Macedon from a backwater to a regional power, and he turned it from a regional power to a world power. Yeah, had this guy not died, he would have also invaded Arabia and then maybe parts of Italy, namely Sicily, and so forth. So yeah, greatest conqueror of all time, arguably. Born to conquer, never fails. What an absolute demigod. Yeah. Next up, Napoleon. So yeah, Napoleon's an interesting one. I'm gonna put him here. I'm gonna put him above Nider, but below Alexander, and I'll explain. So Napoleon does lose quite a few battles. He's not undefeated. But that being said, he is in the modern world. He is in the modern period. This is unheard of. Purely because you also have to think about the equalization aspect. Like Alexander had the best cavalry on earth. Subutai had the best cavalry on earth. Napoleon did not. Napoleon maybe had arguably one of the best armies on earth, but the difference was not there. Someone who was a great soldier and an amazing soldier and a so-and-so soldier, that gap lessens as you go into the future because of weapons, because of guns. Because if you can shoot a gun, you can still kill a very good soldier, but if it was hand-to-hand combat like in the old days, like you could not kill one of Alexander's veterans with hand-to-hand combat more than likely, but you could kill one of Napoleon's veterans with a gun if you're both using guns. So actually I gotta put him up here. Of course, he'll win a ton of famous battles. Friedland, he would also destroy the Russian armies. Austria will be destroyed by him. Prussia as well. He'll invade Spain and almost conquer all of Spain. Of course, Spain will be a huge problem, but he'll conquer parts of Italy as well, Germany. Yeah, the guy is extremely, extremely impressive. I'm trying to think what else can be said about him. Like, I mean, the guy has just won so many battles. He'll also have a very famous campaign into Russia, beat the Russians at the Battle of Bernino, and he will occupy Moscow, and he's one of the first few people that will actually take over Moscow. Of course, he burns Moscow down because what he realizes is that the Russians are not going to surrender, so it has to turn to. Sorry, he won't burn Moscow down. The Russians will burn Moscow down because they resort to a burnt earth strategy to try to defeat the French Grand Armée by using scorched earth tactics and attrition, and it actually works. Napoleon will then go back, and then they'll actually have to fight him at the Battle of Leipzig. So the Battle of Leipzig is one of the most important battles in all of Europe, as it was the first time that Napoleon was decisively defeated in a major field battle. And Leipzig is a bit of a mess as well, the Battle of Nations as it's called, because they outnumbered Napoleon and they suffered so many losses. Yeah, so it was a it was a victory for the anti-Napoleonic coalition, but it was still a little humiliating purely because they lost just so many men trying to defeat Napoleon. But eventually they will defeat him, force him into exile. He'll return. He'll experience a ton of victories in the Hundred Days campaign, I believe. But then he will lose, quite famously, the Battle of Waterloo, and that will be the end of Napoleon. But yeah, just to think about it, I mean, this is a guy who won at Austerlitz. He won at Jena Auerstadt, which was one of his most famous victories. Yeah, so it's quite impressive too. I mean, the guy takes something like an army that's half the size of his enemies and will defeat them, and they're modern armies, and he's, not so much that, like, the gap isn't there, and he's just crushing them. And then his core structure, the way that he structures his armies, is also extremely talented. Yeah, Napoleon, literal god of war, arguably the guy who's the greatest general of all time. Purely because you also have to think about the modern aspect of well as well. Like, the battles are very well recorded. There's opposite sides. There's numerous sources. We know how many men fought in both sides, and he won something like over 30 major battles. Like, the guy is an absolute beast. So yeah, next up, Hannibal. He's gonna go into the legend category. Almost God of War. I want to put him up there so bad, but I can't because he loses. But he is the greatest losing general of all time. There is no general who was more talented, who did not, who lost, who did not win. There was no other general who was more talented than this guy. Period. He took Rome by storm. He would defeat them at the Battle of the Trebia River. He will absolutely annihilate them at the Battle of Cannae and pretty much make Rome feel like it was almost the end. And had he actually been supported by Carthage, which he was not supported by the empire he was invading on behalf of, which is really dumb. Had he actually been supported by them, he would have pretty much almost undoubtedly actually been able to conquer Rome. He would have been reinforced. He could have had somewhere in the range of like 60 to 80,000 men in the middle of Rome, which would have been too much for the Romans to deal with, and they would have probably had to cut out a deal with the Carthaginians and give up some territory, and hopefully he would leave, or otherwise he would have actually besieged Rome and ended Rome right then and there. But unfortunately, they don't give him enough reinforcements, and by the time they decide to reinforce him, it is a bit too late. The army that they sent to reinforce him gets defeated by the Romans when they're trying to cross the Alps. Oh yeah, and also this guy will cross the Alps with elephants, which is unheard of, and he will do it successfully. And he even loses an eye, and he keeps going, and he just almost never loses a battle. He survives in enemy territory for something like over 10 years, which is ridiculous. He will easily defeat something in the range of like over 200,000 plus Roman soldiers. He has so many major victories. He's always a problem. And unfortunately for him, had his government cooperated with him, had his country actually understood the importance of the war and the importance of who he was, he could have actually very well won the whole Second Punic War. So, a bit tragic there. But of course, he will be defeated by none other than Scipio Africanus. I'm going to put him above Hannibal. I know it's a bit controversial. People like to think that Hannibal's a bit better than Scipio, and Scipio won over Hannibal because they screwed over Hannibal because Carthage wouldn't support him. But let me tell you about good old Scipio. This guy was there at Cannae. He saw a lot of his family members die in other battles. He was one of the upper class, part of the upper class. So when Cannae is lost, the Romans will blame the survivors. But because he's upper class, he won't get blamed, and it doesn't hurt his career. So this will allow him to then lead an army in desperate times against the Spaniards. Well, not against the Spaniards, but against the Carthaginians in Spain and their supporters, and he will obliterate them. He will win a ton of battles. He never loses, and he wins a battle that's actually very similar to Cannae. So Cannae actually happens twice, one in favor of the Carthaginians and one in favor of the Romans. It's called the Battle of Nova Carthago, so New Carthage, in Spain, and it has a massive army of Carthaginians and native Spanish tribes who join up with the Carthaginians to fight on behalf of the Punics because they hire a lot of mercenaries. But then what Scipio does is he repeats a lot of the same tactics at Cannae. What he will do is go and set up for battle on a few days in the same orientation. He will put his strong units up front, his weak units to the side, and he does this for a few days. So a day, the enemies will see him for a few days. He shows up strong in the center, weak at the sides, strong in the center, weak at the sides, and his enemies realize this. They put their good troops in the center, weak troops at the side, and then one day they decide, hey, let's go fight now. Finally, it's time. They decide that they're going to fight. Scipio decides it's time, and he switches it. He puts his strong units at the side and his weak units in the center, and the center moves back, so they refuse to fight the strong units, but then his strong units on the sides completely obliterate the weak units on the sides of on the flanks of the Carthaginians. So now all of a sudden the Carthaginian center, which is strong, is now left at its sides, and they get enveloped and destroyed the same way Hannibal enveloped and destroyed the Roman army at Cannae. So it's very interesting that he's actually able to learn from Hannibal, and of course he will famously defeat Hannibal at the Battle of Zuma. It's not a big victory though. It's an important victory, but it's not a super big one in terms of how close it was. It was very close, and he wins by somewhat of a relatively small margin. He wins because he's actually able to get help from Numidian cavalry. When there is a civil war, he supports the opposite side in Numidia, and he gets support from the Numidians. So they actually send him the best cavalry on earth, and he's able to defeat Hannibal with that. Even though Hannibal had a plan to defeat Scipio, but Carthage, of course, got in the way, didn't let him train his recruits for at least 3 weeks longer. They were scared and wanted to get rid of Africanus as soon as possible. So yeah, unfortunately for Hannibal, this would actually cost him the war and the battle. So yeah, Battle of Zama. Next up, and not last, King Charles. Yeah, so this is King Charles the 12th. I'm gonna actually put him above a lot of these guys. I might actually put him right here. And I'll explain. So actually, I put him below Nider. Yeah, I put him above Khalid though. Let me explain the absolute mad lad that this guy is. This guy was born as King of Sweden, very young, and all of his enemies saw, okay, there's a young king in Sweden. This guy is weak. This man is weak. He is weak because, well, he's a young king. We can invade Sweden and we can force them to give up land and to comply with us. So an anti-Swedish coalition will attack Sweden. And this absolute mad lad will take his army and completely just obliterate them. And the way he will do this is one of the most ridiculous ways. Is that he will get his army to go super, super close to the enemy until he could see them, and then shoot them, and then rush at them with melee weapons. And this shock tactic was so insanely effective that it obliterated the Russians on more than one occasion. And this is in fairly recent times too. He was towards the late modern period, and he will defeat them and in a ton of important battles. One of them is the Battle of Navarra, where he will absolutely destroy a huge Russian army with a relatively small Swedish force, using the same tactics of just shoot them in the face and charge at them with swords. And yeah, that apparently works, and he will lead a ton of successful campaigns in the Great Northern War, and he will go undefeated for a very long time, except he will unfortunately lose the Battle of Lava. And the way that this happens is that the Russians just have more men, and eventually the Swedish army keeps taking losses, and they're not as big. So eventually attrition sets in, and he gets defeated at the Battle of Lava, and he's forced into exile, and he runs away to the Ottomans. And while he's in Ottomans, an interesting fact, he brings back the Swedish IKEA meatball recipe that comes from the Ottomans, which is pretty awesome. But he actually is successfully able to make back his way to Sweden. So he actually comes out of exile, and he's about to reignite the war against the Russians. But in the end, he dies in the first battle, or the first few battles after reigniting the war with the Russians. And he is reportedly killed rumored to be killed by one of his own men because they're tired of warfare for so long, and eventually his death will lead to the Great Northern War being a Russian victory, or an anti-Swedish victory, I should rather say. But my God, for when this man was in command, had his soldiers, this absolute mad lad went from literally being a kid with an army that was extremely small to almost conquering Russia. Yeah, and winning against battles he shouldn't at such a young age. Absolutely talented mad lad, literally reincarnation of Alexander, and he'll also die around the same age as Alexander. He will die in his early 30s, I believe. Alexander dies at like 32, 33, and he will die somewhere, I think, 32 or 36. So he dies extremely young as well. Absolute legend. But yeah, guys, let me know what you think about this video. Let me know who else you would like to see be ranked, but I think this would cover it for the greatest generals of all time tier list. Let me know what you guys think. I think there's a lot of literal gods of war, but that's because these are the literal greatest generals of all time. So I think it's only fair to include them there. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. What other tier lists I should make. Thank you so much, and have a great day.